This is Paul Casey. Welcome to the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series, where we like to discuss Kenpo. We talk about all kinds of Kenpo. We talk about basics, sometimes self-defense techniques, forms, principles, concepts, and sometimes we'll even get into realistic things that everybody should be aware of, and that is dealing with the unknown weapon, be it a knife, be it a club, could be a gun. And this is the world we live in today. So today I'm very lucky to have a couple of my favorite guys from the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame. They're both members. And please welcome to the show today. Let's go with, first of all, with Master Marty Zaninovich. How are you, Marty? Good to have you.
Good. Thank you very much, Paul, for having me on. Appreciate it.
And I love it. You have the great logo behind you. You're going to use some of those principles, I know, from that logo today. And then also Master Todd Durgan. Hello, Todd. How you doing, buddy?
Very good, Paul. Thank you very much for having me on. Mr. Zaninovich, great to see you again.
Mr. Durgan, great seeing you too, sir.
Got the best of the best over here. I'm asking questions too. And these guys are really, they really take a serious look at these principles and concepts of Kenpo that are introduced to a lot of our younger students as they come in the beginners, intermediates, and some of the advanced. However, there's a caveat there. And we're going to talk about those problems real quick. So let's just dive into it. We have some techniques, guys, in the Kenpo system. They come up. And why don't we start with Todd? Todd, why don't you give me some of the techniques that we have to deal with the clubs?
So the names?
Yeah.
Checking the storm, evading this. You want me to go through the whole list for you?
You can just do a couple of them.
Oh, you caught me off guard with that one there, my
See,
friend.
I did. I knew it.
Yeah. Checking the storm, evading the storm, calming the storm, obstructing, defying, returning, brushing, capturing, securing, clipping, and a couple toward the end there, escape and circling.
If you get a chance, folks, watch Todd's video on capturing the storm. He has a really cool little nuance to it, especially when it comes to the disarming of the club from the opponent. Let's go over to Marty. Marty, I'm throwing the knives at you because that is one of your specialties, and you're in the process of writing a book on it, and we're all looking forward to seeing it down the line. But let's just talk about I think there's like 5 knife attacks, correct?
There's several, and there's a couple we don't want to call knife attacks, like we were talking earlier, and we can keep those to the side.
You don't like that one, entwining lance?
No. That's as far as the lance techniques go, we have the overhead, reining lance, we have thrusting lance, glancing lance, piercing lance. There's a lot of basic knife techniques, whether overhead or thrusting or slashing type of an attack. And we can get into that as we move forward.
The good thing about it, at least we identify the weapon by the term of lance or the storm with the clubs. And the third one that we have that we sometimes deal with is the rod. Okay. And I'm not going to go into the depth of that, but I'm more interested actually how they overlap and they can intersect. It's just a change, but then you have to worry about what that weapon can do to you. I mean, is it a cutting or is it a blunt instrument they could both be the same, but most likely with a knife, it's going to be cutting. And the scary thing is it goes in and out and up and down all around. It's like the magic bullet, JFK, conspiracy, theory. You're looking at all kinds of stuff that can happen with that. So I know that Todd's great strength is he likes to examine it through the planes. And he uses the universal pattern by Mr. Parker. So maybe we should delve in a little bit that way. Todd, how do we address the proper study of the weapon portion of our art?
Well, so proper versus ideal versus reality is those are 3 different things. We can say proper based on physical mechanical function of a blade, like it cuts, or a club, it whacks and smacks, and in a lot of instances locks and folds as well. But so we have to look at depending on which aspect we're looking at that from is going to determine you know, what our mindset's going to be and what our motive is going to be with regard to the drilling and the application and the understanding of those weapons, right?
Right. Marty, you know, what is the proper mindset that you want to prepare these students for, no matter what level of proficiency in your training?
Awareness. I think that's the key example of the look you want to have. You want to be aware of what the blade can do. The intent, the unknown is something that you can't really understand other than if you have a good idea of what not to do, you'll be more aware of that. And when I say that, because a knife generally will come in a stealth, you know, type pattern, they'll call it the red zone within about a 3-foot parameter, and you won't even know you've got plunged, you know, when it does happen. So we want to make the student aware of that.
Perfect example of that is that YouTube video with Guru Santo at the airport doing the airport security training. That is one of the, you know, aside from watching some live knife action, that is one of the greatest lessons that you can see. The example of just how dangerous a knife is. Now, mind you, it's in Guru Santo's hands. And he's probably the last guy I know. He's the last guy I know I would ever want to run into in an alley with a knife in his hand. And
he's 85 years old and still handle it pretty well.
I didn't say younger or older. I said right now.
You're right.
But the point is, you see that red zone that Mr. Zaninovich is talking about, because there are several opportunities where those guys have opportunity to maintain distance and they close distance. He plays it off in that video and they're done. They're cooked.
Well, go ahead. I agree with that. And that's a problem.
The mindset, let's go back to Marty on the mindset. Marty, you and I have discussed this before about the mindset and how sometimes people have this preconception because of a previous historical moment, incident, whatever, with a cut.
Well, I was asked one time, and it's by high-ranking black belts. They asked me, they said, you know, we're okay with gun techniques, but we're not okay with a knife. And I said, well, the reason you're not okay with a knife is, I said, how many times have you been shot? You haven't. I said, how many times have you had a paper cut yourself while you're cooking, cut yourself when you're doing something with a sharp object or a blunt object that still penetrates? I said, that sets in the back of your mind. So you're always carrying that seed of that pain, what it is. Even a simple thing as a paper cut, you know that it's going to inflict a stinging type pain to you.
Let's go to Todd. Todd, you train with a practical training weapon. You have that with you? Okay, good. And then you also have one that you carry on you for real life situations. Okay, tell us the importance of why you have both of those.
So these are I can use one to train with, and I can use one to carry, and they are ultimately literally the same weight and the same knife. The difference is this one doesn't cut you, this one does.
And in circumstances, we would say, Marty, you know, out the door goes the fine motor skills, and we're going to revert to the big muscles taking over and just primitive, simplistic response. So if you're sitting there fighting with something that you're not used to using, that can be a problem.
Absolutely. The problem is with the blade, it's the all-time equalizer. It equalizes jiu-jitsu, Kenpo, JKD, Muay Thai. It will equalize any type of art because it comes in so stealth, and its stopping power is unbelievable. They say in street situations, right at 47% of all murders and altercations take place with either a bladed, blunt object or a gun being the number one. But those are huge numbers. And the knife is probably the easiest to get and conceal. I mean, it's legal in most areas, so you can carry it a lot easier than you're going to be able to carry a gun or deal with the consequences of a gun. Carry-wise.
I think I've told the story about one of my students in class. I had a similar training knife, and the blade was a little looser so I could flip it open, but I walked toward him with it concealed, hand down by my side. he was yakking with one of the other students. And I did this on purpose to scare the crap bejesus out of him and everybody around him. And to see, though, what their awareness level was. You and I, Paul, have talked about that new Amazon show, Reacher. And you can watch him. That's a great show because it shows him panning and it shows him reading the room and being very observant and observing opportunities for danger, opportunities for advantage. But so as I walked up to the student, he looked at me and looked away. He didn't, now mind you, we're in class. We weren't in class. It was either, I think it was before class. And as I walked toward him, and I was walking very directly toward him, I flipped the blade open and ran it across his throat all in one motion. So he heard click, and it's a stainless steel blade too. So he felt the cold steel go across his throat. And I'm telling you, if you ask him to this day, he'll tell you that was probably one of the single most defining moments of his training with regard to paying attention to what his environment has to offer or to come after him with.
Absolutely.
Marty, 2 points. The reality check there, the mindset, it's a whole different game. We're talking real life situations that you can't even really train for, but you can at least be aware of the circumstances. Sadly, I think we had discussed this before. There was a student that you had that actually died from a knife incident, and he was a very proficient young martial artist, well suited to be able to defend himself. But I think the fatal mistake, you can probably explain it to us.
It wasn't one of my students, one of the guys I trained with down at the academy. And the guy was 22 years old. He was a proficient boxer, sweetheart of sweethearts. I mean, he had a heart of gold and skill level to match. I mean, he was phenomenally good, but he was humble, extremely humble. He was proficient in the empty hands. He was proficient with stick and knife. He was breaking up a fight. Somebody came from behind, plunged him. He died, 22 years old.
Wow.
It's sad. It's very sad. But the moral of the story is, even if you're aware, your eyes have to be looking all around you all the time because you're not connected. That's the only connection you have to that assailant or potential, and the problem that I see so many times, and it goes back to, you don't know what you don't know. I see in a lot of martial arts schools, they teach defense off knives, defense off guns, defense off clubs. And that student's going to go out believing that they're going to work 100%. And furthermore, when they start that belief system, that plunge stays in there. For most knife attacks, they're going to come in and it's going to be like the jailhouse stab. It's going to go in and out 100 different times, as many as they can. The further you're engaged, they say, if you're engaged 5 seconds, you're going to get stabbed 3 to 5 times minimum. So that engagement, it's deadly. You need to stop it as quick as you can or get away from it and use everything you can. And that's another story that we can go into, but it is an awareness, non-connected versus connected. And you don't want to be the one that's getting connected with that stainless steel blade either.
I think, Todd, Mr. Parker created a basic rudimentary approach to the weapons in the early 60s with some of the techniques, but they're rudimentary. Are they good is that good for us to examine those techniques for what they may offer us, or we making a mistake?
I think you examine everything for what it may offer you. You're a fool if you don't. But the problem is you cannot fool yourself. Do not kid yourself, and do not tell yourself stories about how you think you're going to be able to pull something off because one of your white belts came at you slow with a knife and you were able to do thrusting lance. The reality of it is that you can look at all of that stuff for what it has to offer. The problem that I see, and this is in line with what Mr. Z's talking about, is that people aren't honest with themselves. When they look at these things and they evaluate these, this is going to be great. Yeah, you just step off here and you do this to the guy and he's not going to do anything. Yeah, no, that's probably not the case. After 35 or 40 years in the arts, you stand a much better chance, but you still stand an equal chance of getting cut as anybody else facing a blade.
There's a very famous story, Mr. Parker being questioned on that with a knife attack, I guess, down in Los Angeles at one of the premier hotels. And the person said, what would you do about this? And he obviously, I think, probably did, a glancing lance or a thrusty lance or something like that. He disarmed the guy and hurt the guy a little bit on that, I would believe, because I don't think Parker would ever do anything with the intent to really seriously hurt somebody. But if you're going to stick a knife in him, he's going to respond to that. Marty, so when you're first working with students, and for those that are watching this is a very important point I want to make with Marty. Marty, how much time do you spend on the awareness factor before you actually get into the practical application of some kind of response or drills or techniques?
I think it goes hand in hand as you're starting to train them, because you got to show them what it is so they get an understanding. It goes back to the language concept. You can teach it from a whole language concept, whole to part to whole, or you can go into a phonic type scenario. And I believe with the Filipino, they're always getting the word flow coming into the equation. So when we're talking with the knife, we're teaching muscle memory and reaction time to start building up a faster reaction with them. And then we'll start increasing the pressure on it. We'll pressure test it. And then we'll start having resistance training go along with that pressure. And keep in mind, it's still a training tool. So the intimate threat is not really there. Thank goodness. I mean, you wouldn't be able to play. Right. So in answer to your question, it goes hand in hand as you're starting to make them aware of it. You're taking them, you're talking to them, give them that whole look. You'll break it down as you go, but you want to keep it into that flow type environment.
So Marty, you have some weapons that you've developed for safety equipment for training purposes. Can you tell us about it?
Yes. I wanted some knives designed to fit a new student on how to hold the blade, how to start working with the blade. I started out with a double edge versus a single edge, for the reason being with the single edge, I've got to teach them more knife awareness. With the double edge, they can make a mistake and still cut and get a feel of it, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. The pathway I took from the pathway I learned from Minnesota, we've always used that type of blade. So there's not a right, not a wrong. It's just my personal weapon of choice based on how I was taught. Smiley Ukitas and myself, we developed this knife, and it's made out of aluminum. We made it as real as possible with a smooth edge to give it a good feel whenever you're slicing with it, but it won't hurt you. That's the one thing we're worried about, safety all the time. If you're playing with these type of blades, you always want to have safety glasses on. And I'll tell you why. We were doing some knife sparring in groups one time, and I dodged it one time, but I got caught right in the corner of my eye. I didn't have safety glasses on, and it cut my eye, and I had to go into UCLA trauma center. And I was lucky I didn't lose the eye, because if it deflates, it's not like a tire. You're not going to pump it up if you put a patch on. It's gone. You're getting glass. So if and when you're doing knife type training, wear safety glasses, watch who you're working with, make sure you're dealing with a qualified instructor that's got some savvy and weapons, experience. And I've seen so many times, we take just a straight empty hands martial artist, and the old saying is, if you put a weapon in their hands, it's just an extension of your body anyway. Well, it's not. There's a different set of rules that go along with the weaponry. And I think that needs to be taught, because when you're dealing with the blade, the reach, you're starting to look at what's going to be the most successful position of that blade and how you're going to hold it, the positioning, the posturing, when you're coming at the person, where you're going to come in for an ice pick grip in front, generally not. I mean, it's like an inward block, and there's two types. You got a thrusting, one movement, and you have a hammering, 1, 2. And that's what you're doing essentially with the ice pick grip. You got to bring it up to cock it before you plunge it. Generally from the rear, it's probably the most effective, I would say, on that.
I'm going to go. Both of you gentlemen have explored and investigated and incorporated the Filipino martial arts themes on how to use weapons. I know Todd. Todd, when you're working with your students, do you engage with? Do you bring that in a lot more? Do you? Oh, by the way, do you use safety equipment when you're training with that, or how does that?
So most of my guys aren't ready to actually do that level of sparring with the weapons, with the knife, because of what I'm bringing in to what I'm teaching. It's just that it just happens to be that all of them are kind of not ready for that yet. Although they're getting there. So yeah, we're going to start doing that, and they're going to have to have all the safety equipment. What was the question again?
Well, when you're working, you've incorporated some of the Filipino martial arts systems that you have researched, and do you incorporate that now with any of your with your weapons training?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I was one of those guys, those empty hand guys that used to think, oh yeah, weapons are just an extension of your own being, and everybody that hasn't experienced even just the training, and I got to point out, Mr. Zaninovich almost lost an eye training with a knife. Imagine, had that been a real blade, it's gone, into the brain and you're done. And that was just training. So how dangerous are knives really? Right? I mean, that should give a person an understanding of the level of and the depth of danger and safety that they need to, and awareness that they need to have about them while they're training. So yeah, so what I do is I have, specifically, I've just basically, instead of using the Filipino numbering systems that you see typically, the 1 through 12 or the 1 through 9, I use the universal pattern. So it carries over from the empty hand. Now, with regard to awareness, I carry the same idea and the same mentality empty hand as I do with the weapon. Although weapon awareness specifically is a bit different because you're being more aware of what the weapon is doing specifically, but environmental awareness and your surroundings is equally as important, because, for example, the young 22-year-old man that got stuck from behind, or the other guy, while he was focused on the 2 people in front of him, breaking him up. I mean, that's an unfortunate thing. So one of the things that I do with my students is, if they're covering out, for example, they finish a technique and a technique line and everything's great, and they covering out and they cover out into me, I've been known to grab them and throw them on the floor, or jump on them and put them in a headlock, or grab them in a guillotine choke or whatever. And so they all are very cautious when they cover out, whether it's me or somebody else, it doesn't matter, but they're, very aware of the environment.
Marty, and your students, when you work with them, do you feel it's more important as they're progressing, say a beginner to an intermediate, to make sure you focus more, say, on weapons awareness? Because you're gonna probably encounter that a lot more than just a fist fight, or at least for the fear of your life, you're going to.
Well, no doubt. I mean, the ones when they training, from empty hand, and I agree with Mr. Durgan. I mean, they got to be aware of their surroundings. They've got to be aware of the situational hazards that come on. When I teach them empty hands. A lot of the empty hand drills that we do in the Filipino arts will correlate with a knife or with a stick. So you should be able to take empty hand to go to a stick, to go to a knife. You can do it with a staff. You can do it with just about anything that's a weapon, providing you have an understanding of how that best application of that weapon should be utilized. For practicing, we've got these little training knives sometimes. I'll put it in the beginner's hands when we do just straight knife training. And just to give it a feedback, when you hit, the light will come on and it'll make a little noise.
But you have to hit flesh with that, correct? Because it has an electric.
No, this, you can hit the arm, you can hit anywhere, and it'll still give.
Perfect.
You can hit your son, and it won't be called child abuse. So it's all good. Then the other thing I like to use with the students, when I start getting them to the point of they're learning how to move with the weapon and be more aware of it, I have this is called the no-lie blade. And what we do, we put lipstick on around the edge of it, have them with a white t-shirt. And I was at a camp up at Grand Lelius, and I was training up there with a bunch of people, and I brought these out, and lo and behold, we had a doctor in the class too. And what I did, I had the students fight with a knife training, and it's not realistic because it's not going to happen. So after that 1 minute, 2 minute sparring session, which will never last that long, I had the doctor examine each cut and tell them how long they had from where that cut went in. They were dead in 5 seconds. Yeah. And when that adrenaline's pumping, you don't have the chance to do that much wound management. You'll do a couple wound management, but above and beyond that, you're done. You're going to bleed out. You die. There's no coming back.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that another part of the management of a weapons interaction or interlude is that if I'm going to get stuck, I want to be aware of what I'm exposing and what I'm not exposing, which is why you see a lot of times you see the disarms with the back of the hands versus the front of the hand, because I can't grab something here, but I can, you know, if they cut this, it's so.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I'm totally in agreement with that. And we do the back of hands because here you can live to talk about it. Here, you're going to end up bleeding out pretty quick. You know,
Right.
A lot of times it's like a deer. And if you look at it that way, and this way we've been trained, you know, it's like a deer. When a deer comes down to fight, he'll duck in, protecting his organs.
Yep.
We're no different than that environment, because you want to protect the vitals. And the more you can protect the vitals, if you get slashed, the biggest key thing is keep your mind in the game, because and Mr. Nasando tells us all the time, you are not dead. You know, make sure that you keep in there, you nullify the threat and be on with it. You know, be aware of what's happening too. If you start giving your vitals to them, you're going to pass out without even trying. I mean, you know, that's the sad part. But if you keep it like that, like a deer, you know, down, you're protecting the organs all the time, you're going to have a safer, or not safer, but you're going to have a better chance of survival.
Do you both feel that it would probably be behooving for safety purposes to train more with, say, the club or the stick versus the knife during the early beginnings of your training?
Yeah, I do a progression from club to knife because it gives, but that's just me, because it gives a couple things. It gives me opportunity to integrate weapons, period. It gives me opportunity to give a better understanding or get for the student to get a better understanding of range, right? Range, and to start their journey with weapon awareness, right? And how to operate the weapons and so forth. And then, you know, if you have the stick, you can also, you know, that cool blade behind Mr. Zaninovich there on his logo, you can tell them, look, this, you know, for awareness, this line of the knuckles with your club, that's the blade. So you need to be aware of what's happening, right? With that edge, so on and so forth. And so if I'm cutting up, I need to have that line of the knuckles working upward, because that's where the blade is. And so when they transition to a live bladed weapon, or not a live, but a bladed weapon, then they have a better understanding of, hopefully have a better understanding of that, and the transition is a little bit easier.
Marty, how about that? What Todd said?
You know, that's an instructor's preference, you know, and we do the same thing. And we start them with an empty hand, but we'll generally start them with 2 sticks instead of 1.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of different mindsets with that. You know, a lot of times the stick will be treated like a sword, and you're going to learn more slashing type motions. I'll plug for our swords. Here's our swords that we make also.
Yeah, those are beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, very nice.
So we treat a round like a round and a flat like a flat. So we're teaching with the stick how to utilize it differently in a stick fighting situation. You know, what parts of the stick to utilize, how to strike with the stick versus how to slice with the stick. You know, it's more for a sword type environment, because they couldn't carry swords at the time, or they would have got killed or done in. So they had to utilize the stick to substitute for the sword. So there's 2 different thought processes that goes on with that. And that's all the intent and the methodology of your application on how to handle that specific weapon. And that goes into detail, you know, when you start playing with them.
Yeah. I'm gonna stick with you for just a second. Go ahead, Todd. You want to say something?
Sorry. So one of the things I wanted to add there, and one of the reasons that I have geared it the way I have, is because in today's environment in the US anyway, it's far less likely you're going to run into somebody wielding a sword. Far more likely they're going to have a pocket knife or a small knife and or a club, because a club you can pick up anywhere. You can pick up the broomstick and break it. You can do whatever. So if they have that, if they have the understanding and the better, the understanding of the access to those weapons is different, Now, when we get into the art side of it, having the sword, the blade, and all of those things is far more applicable, and for studying the Filipino arts as a whole in general. And I'm not trying to contradict what Mr. Zaninovich is saying. I'm just saying that
opinions.
my focus is so that my students are combat ready at a sooner point in their journey. And if they can pick up a stick, because if you think about it, if I have a stick against a guy with a knife, my chances with the stick are going to be far greater against the guy with the knife, because my range is different. Now, if he's got a sword, that's a different story, but not a lot of people run around the streets in the US anyway, carrying swords. Go to the Philippines, you might have a different story.
Yeah, that's
Different
because
game.
it's more of a cultural thing there. It's accepted. It's a
Absolutely.
normal. You see it on a regular basis. Maybe I'm wrong, Marty. Please set me
No,
straight.
I think you're right on that as far as the Philippines go. Let's add to what Mr. Durgan was talking about too, because I like where he's going with this, and the easeability to utilize what's in your environment. That's situational awareness. That's environmental awareness. And I agree with that. And here's the key thing. You're not always going to have a stick. You're not always going to have a knife on you, but you're always going to have a cell phone on you. And any type of distancing you can get, whether it's a cell phone, a book, a computer bag, a shoe, that's going to start giving you that edge you need just to get that split second that you need to help. If you have a pen, the pen is no different than a knife for thrusting. So we need to condition that student to understand that, it's not just a knife, it's not just a blade, it's not just a broomstick, not contradicting, just adding to.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
When we go into that awareness area, Mr. Masano is always telling us you need to buy that few seconds of time to react. If they have a blade and you can use your phone to hit it, to defend it just a little bit in the throat, in the nose, use it. If you have your computer bag, that's a shield. We practice with shields and blades too. Are you always going to have one? No, you don't carry it, but you generally carry a computer bag or a backpack. If you have a jacket, you can take the jacket off, and the jacket's no different than having a sarong, which is from the Indonesian arts, which is a heavy bladed system. You do disarms from there. It gives you that advantage of going onto an airplane after you go through the check. You can't carry anything on, but you can carry a pen, you can carry a scarf, you can carry a computer bag. Those are the reality of what you're going to do with. You'll have a phone. So everything that you have on you can be utilized as a weapon if you start really adhering and playing with it, in a sanitary environment. But you got to play with it, or it's just never going to come to you at the last minute.
And don't forget, your seat is not just a floating device. It's also a perfect shield because it has 2 straps on the back of it.
That's exactly right.
Your seat cushion. Sorry, Mr.
No, I'm listening. This is good.
I just wanted to.
This. Should we focus more on drill application rather than a form technique?
Absolutely.
Or should we have drills that we should develop into a technique?
No, because just like Mr. Zaninovich said, it creates a greater motor skill training when you use, and this is look. So after years and years and years of doing Kenpo, not as much as some and more than others, I realized that the Filipino Kali Eskrima systems have some of the best drilling practices that you can ever find anywhere in any art, because they have these circular flows that you're continuing, and they start to incorporate little things, and then more and more and more, and and you go through all of these phases, and each drill is allowed to grow through this monstrous thing that's available. And by doing that, and not the other thing that they allow is that flow that Mr. Zaninovich is talking about, right? They allow you to develop that through those exercises, through those drills. Whereas a self-defense technique, let's say delayed sword, for example, you get to practice that technique, okay, and you're going through 3-4 moves, however you want to break it down to the stance or whatever. And it's just those 3 or 4 moves. Now you can turn that into a circular flow model or circular flow drill, but you're going to have to do something a little bit different with it to get it there. Whereas a lot of the Kali Eskrima stuff it's just this drilling that is just absolutely wonderful stuff, like the hubud.
There's no doubt. And the key thing, a lot of people don't understand the hubad all the way, and I'm glad you brought that up. With the hubad drill, you should be able to put a blade in your hand. You should be able to take every position in that hubad flow into a technique, into a weaponry, type flow with that also. I do like the Filipino aspect, and we call it the learning triangle. One, the cooperative, because you're going to be going along with the program, then the competitive, because you're going to amp it up a little bit as far as pressure testing and resistance testing. And then you're going to the combative as much as possible as you both agree upon. The key thing is with those flow drills, you want to learn them, you want to throw them away, because unlike our Kenpo techniques, we get in a mindset of having to follow through and finish that technique. So we end up chasing a technique. And in the Filipino arts, you do not chase the technique. You take what's given to you, you disarm it, you turn it around on them and get that energy redirecting into them. So I like that mindset that the Filipino martial arts does come with versus, sitting there. And you got to keep in mind, in Kenpo, we punch, we stand there, and let them finish up the technique on us. Call it overkill, call it overskill, call it what you like. The guy's not moving, he's not pressure testing, he's standing there being a good dummy, a stone statue. That's no different than having a 5-foot police officer arrest a 6'2" guy, and the big guy's going along with her. They're going along with the program. That's not what the martial arts are about. You have to learn from that cooperative type learning, but in all reality, that pressure testing is going to go on, and that left is going to be followed up by a right, and those strikes are not going to stay out there. So it's like defending, off an inside overhead with a strike, like Mr. Andersano says. He says, see if you're that fast. He says, most people aren't. He said, let it whiz by, give them a reason to block, and then do your technique. It's all in the setup and understanding, the reality of that impact weapon or that blade coming at you, so you have a better chance of survival.
Right. So what I've done with the hubad to incorporate it into what I do is I have four levels, what I call 4 levels of the hubad, where it goes through just a very basic empty hand, and then it continues on there. And the reason I bring this up is because you brought up you should be able to move into your techniques, and that's one of the levels where we go into joint locks manipulations, incorporate some chinan, some jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu stuff, and then we go into technique, self-defense techniques. So you work, you got an overhead coming at you, you can work raining lance, you can work, start into some of the storm techniques and so on and so forth. Anyway, I just wanted to, because I agree that, and that's what I was talking about, Mr. Casey, is that those drilling, those drills and those practices are so malleable that you can move them and work them into so many different things, and you learn that in the Filipino systems.
It's funny you brought that up, because if you look at what Trejo used to convey to me, he liked the principles of boxing, and he would use those drills, and then what he would do is just free flow it. And if you think about what boxers do, it's continuously fighting until told to stop for whatever reason, be the officials or such. I think that gives you a better understanding of how to deal with combat, because it's never going to be the same. You're going to work a drill of a jab, across, and a hook, maybe, but maybe the guy counters that, and that's what they know how to counter those moves too. So thus, as Marty says, chasing the technique, yeah, that's because we're really just trying to help the student to have a set of maneuvers, to pursue with some kind of response. But we know that's not going to really ever going to be there. Well, it may, but most of the time it's not in true combat. Am I right about that, Marty?
It can be looked at from several different ways. I mean, if you're looking at it from a commercial school, you're going to teach them to memorize a technique, and it's going to be more memorized, because let's face it, most of those people are not going to be getting in a fight. They want to do it to better themselves, to be a little bit better than they were the day before. And that's what we're there for. We're mentors. So we can take it to a higher level, or we can take it to the level that's going to fit their needs. And I think that's extremely important to understand that, because not everyone is going to want to be in that arena. And there's going to be some teachers that are outstanding beginner to intermediate teachers. Then there's going to be the intermediate to advanced, and there'll be the teacher of teachers. and should be able to cover all aspects of that, with the understanding of how to get that student to move properly, and then start pressuring them. And you're only going to pressure them so far. Our key in our martial arts, being an instructor, is not teaching them how to take a life. That's easy. That's probably the easiest thing you can do. Consequences are tough, but the key thing is, how do you teach them how to preserve a life? How do you teach them to understand the skill set that they have and to be more of an advocate of preserving and walking away? That's the toughest one. That's the toughest lesson anybody will learn, because they want to be all that. And I had one guy tell me, I'm a warrior. I'm this. I get it. I really do. And I respect that. But, that's not where it's going to fit. Now, like we do, we teach 3 different levels. We teach the public to a different variance of that. We teach law enforcement at a different level. And then we teach military. And you can figure out, here,
Yep.
You're safe. Here, you really watch it, because you can't teach them too much what to do, or they shouldn't do. And here you teach them termination, when to use it. We're not assassins. And that's what Mr. Nasano says. It's easy to come and stealth with the blade and be considered an assassin. We are not that. And we don't advocate that. We preserve life to make it better, but we give you an understanding of how to protect yourself and your family in the same breath.
The only problem you're having is that with the law enforcement, they're always being forced to be compliant. We got
No
to
doubt.
protect, and it's a liability issue. You're dispensable if you're a police officer. He said, well, we don't want to get sued. The city doesn't want to get sued, so we lose one cop, and that's how they're seeing it. It's tragic, because those guys and gals are doing something to give some kind of civility to the community, and also to put out a mindset, hey, you're going to be okay. We're here to help you. Because I've yet to meet a police officer that's not going to show up. They want to be there to help you, but they're also being hindered in a lot of ways, and that's a problem. Okay, I'm going to Todd. Todd, I want your answer. Should we just dispel with the Kenpo techniques for knives and maybe even clubs for the most part, and just incorporate drills to deal with those issues?
Absolutely not.
Why?
No, because if you look at if you say, should we dispense with those techniques, having a weapon in the technique? Yeah, maybe, but keep the technique. The sequence of motion, it has a lesson to it. Okay. How you perform or how you execute that technique can be different based on your understanding of the weapon itself, right? So look at Raining Lance, for example. You'd be hard pressed to find anybody, first of all, to attack you with a overhead ice pick move like Mr. Zaninovich was talking about earlier, with the I forget, in one of the conversations earlier, because that's such a time-consuming attack, right? It takes so much, it's so telegraphic. So but would it happen for something else? Certainly, maybe a club. If somebody was just pissed off and coming at you full throttle, they'd had too much to drink and they got a leg off a bar stool or something. So there's purpose for the techniques. There's value in the techniques, but I think, in my personal opinion, the application and the understanding of what the application is doing needs to be researched better by a lot of people and looked at differently, I'll say, without,
Well, can't we still address that issue, Marty, with just drills?
Well, I'm in agreement with Mr. Durgan. I think, as far as the system goes, our Kenpo system, we need to keep it intact. If we start busting it up, then we're just, going to have pieces of this and that, and it's not going to have that true essence of the Kenpo system that we profess to keep as pure as we can. I do believe teaching that technique, there is a lesson there, sometimes what not to do, but I like teaching some of those techniques, and what I'll do with them, I'll teach the Kenpo technique for the value of it. Then I'll tell them, here's some alternatives that we can learn from the Filipino, thought process, which will higher, and raise your success ratio up of survival rates. And it's going to put you in a different position, but you'll learn the technique. Plus, what it is too, when I teach that, and you asked me earlier, when I teach a new student coming in, I want to vet through, because I don't want to show them how to use a blade. And I'm really cautious about that. And Mr. Insano always tells us, be cautious, teaching the right thing to the wrong person, you don't know. And when I go in a seminar circuit, I don't know who's there all the time. I have no clue. You have a house full of people, and you're sitting there and you recognize most of them, and you kind of have a good, reference point and referral from their teachers. But there's a few that walk in, I don't know who they are.
Yep.
So I'll modify what I teach. When I teach a Kenpo technique, they'll get bored with it a little bit, but I want to see it and give them the essence of what it should be. And then I'll give them something, and I'll take it as far as I feel comfortable in that environment. If I'm good with the people and I know them, then I'll take it all the way and show, some deeper type techniques for disarms or takeaways on it.
What are we missing, guys, in the techniques from the Kenpo system?
What do you mean? What are we missing? I think some of the things that are missing are the simple things like arm position, hand position. You're not going to do a traditional inward downward diagonal block on thrusting lance. And if you do, or a hand chop the radial nerve, and if you think you're going to get away with that, you're fooling yourself. That goes back to that whole be honest with yourself, and be honest with what's really happening here, and be honest with what this weapon that's attacking you can really do. I don't teach thrusting lance, for example, with the block with the hand chop. I teach it with the back of the arm, step off. Now I want to try and strike the rail nerve, but I'm stepping off angle, off line with the back of that arm to strike that hand and go immediately to that, divert seize, go immediately to that seize. And I don't do the groin strike. I go to a side kick or a knife edge kick to the back leg. Then we go into the rest of the technique, so on and so forth. So,
but I'm saying, are we focusing too much right now on what our response is? Shouldn't we think it a little more expanding it, Marty, on the types of attacks that are coming at us that are more realistic?
Realistic attacks are good. I mean, and the first question was, and I agree with Mr. Durgan, you've got to look and understand and be honest with yourself. That's probably the biggest question that goes unanswered, because we all think we're that and a box of chocolate sometimes, and it's just, you're kidding yourself, especially in the weapons. The weapons are not going to lie, especially a blade. When you see red, it's like the old saying in the Philippines, the history of the Philippines was written in red on the beaches and then washed away. So it's been tried and proven, and not much coming back. So going to the techniques, I think you have to be aware, like Mr. Durgan was saying, and he's modified it somewhat, which is fine. But when you're inside that center line, we generally try not to be in the center line when we're doing the Filipino arts, because what I'll do sometimes, I'll sneak around to the guy that's attacking, just what you're asking now, and I'll give him a blade in his hand. So if you're zoning inside and you're turning too much, you're going to get plunged right in the kidney with another knife, a backup weapon. And that's what'll happen. I remember we had a seminar one time at the academy with Tuhangahi. Phenomenal instructor, head of the Paquita Tertia system. This guy must have had more knives on him than a knife store. I mean, and knows how to use them. I mean, this guy, and you know who he is, Mr. Durgan. I mean,
yeah, I've watched some of his stuff.
Oh, there's brutal, there's mean, there's tough, there's knowledgeable. Then there's him. He's got his own category.
Yeah.
And he teaches the military over in the Philippines. I mean, so he's got a huge understanding. And I'll never forget that one time he says, you in the center, you turn a little bit. He says, I stick you other hand. You didn't do anything to stop me. And that's the problem. Toe knives, hand knives, like we're told sometimes you put a ring knife on inside and you're walking down and you're just like an older man, like they stated, and you happen to turn, oops, sorry. And that oops, sorry comes across their carotid and they're dead. And the problem is you don't know the person you're attacking. You have to, take in consideration that he's had training and he's good. Don't underestimate him, because when you start underestimating, even a person with a blade in his hand could end up killing you by accident. And that's a problem. They don't just do one thrust and stay there with a blade. That's going to go. That's why I talked earlier they're going to plunge. They're going to grab and plunge. I mean, that's common. You don't always do that. And we teach different techniques to do that, so you don't get thrown in jail. But Anyway, that's a different story. We're not going to go into that, but you're not going to leave that blade out there. It's not going to happen that way. It's going to go and it's going to come back. Guaranteed. I guarantee you. So when we're going and doing these techniques and it's static training, you're going to die. We're given the false hope that that movement, and we're sitting there, okay, block and growing. Okay, good. I just got plunged with the other arm, not even knowing it. You haven't done anything. The blade's still in his hand.
Right.
We didn't even talk about him pulling back and drawing back.
Right.
And that's why I show him a double-edged blade, draw back. Even a beginner can draw back out of fear and still do some damage. That's one of the reasons I like the double-edged blade for a beginner.
But boy, that technique is great for a straight punch.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You made my point that the attack was not going to be a compliant, you know, he's going to hold the move. It's going to be this reaction, and it could be either intentionally he's going to pull back, or you might hurt him and he's going to retract because he's going to hold.
He's going to retract no matter what, whether you hurt him or not. His intent is to come in there and continually plunge in you. That's what they know. They see it on TV. They think that's the do all be all attack. That's a jailhouse attack. Plunge him as many times you can. And they will not stand out there.
Oftentimes that's accompanied with a grab. So,
yes.
You know, and so if you're looking at realism, and this is where you have to separate yourself from the traditional techniques, from the traditional Ed Parker techniques. If you're going to look at realism, then you have to go all the way to realism. Okay, yeah, he's going to pull the knife back, but typically if they're going to come in with a sewing machine attack, they're going to be grabbing you as well, whether it's around the back of the neck, whether it's the shoulder, whether it's the whatever. And so now they've connected to you. And when that connection starts, that's when you should have already had something happening. But, you know, you are then directly connected to this person and should be doing something contrary to being stuck with a knife.
Absolutely. That's that time when you're in there for every 5 seconds, you're getting plunged 3 to 5 times.
Yeah.
I will ask a couple more questions and we're going to wrap on this one. There is now a new facet in the sport tournament area of sport tournament sparring with weapons. Okay. Do you see practical value in that, or is that just entertainment? It's an open question.
Mr. Durgan.
Either one.
You know, in the Philippine Arts, we have tournaments. We've had tournaments, and you know, the closest I can see to any valid type knife tournament sparring is when I was with the Dog Brothers. That was more of a full contact environment, and I'll tell you what, you never walked out of there. And I always would tell Guru Mark Denny, he said, you know, higher consciousness through harder contact. That was their motto. That was their mantra. And he'd also say, I want you walking out of here with the same IQ you walked in with. Good luck. You got a fencing helmet on. You got a stick that's 31 inches long and 1.5 inches round, and it's coming at you with just a fury to hurt you. The knife is the same thing. They're going to take it. They're going to grab you. What we talked earlier, like you stated with the grab too. It's going to plunge. It's going to stab. It's going to do everything it can to stop you in your tracks. That's the closest thing I've seen to realistic tournament type sport fighting. In the Filipino world, it's more controlled like our technique, or like our tournament world for our Kenpo or anything, you know, martial arts world. You know, it's a game of tag a lot more so than not. Do I think it has a value? I think you added another category to the learning of what you're doing. Am I a fan of it? If you want to go out there and play and test yourself a little bit to see if you can get in quick, okay. You know, but you're going to be breaking a lot of rules too to make that touch.
Is there safety equipment in the sport, or is
yes.
it? Okay.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They actually had that division at a couple of tournaments up here in the Northwest where, and it's interesting, I'll just say, but I have to agree with Mr. Zaninovich, you know, with regard to, you know, you know, just like freestyle. You know, you put the pads on, you're going back and forth, but there's no real imminent threat, no real imminent risk of danger. Do you get a better understanding of the range of the weapons? Absolutely, but you probably already had that before you stepped in to do some freestyle with a club in your hand, with a padded club in your hand. If you recall our previous conversation, Mr. Casey, remember I said that the most realistic fighters and freestylers were who? Dog Brothers. That was exactly what I told him. I said,
I've
you
been
want to
in
see some,
conversation with Marty many times. He tells me the inside scoop, and it's like, it's almost
They're
like
the real
watching
deal, man. They're the real
Johnny
deal.
Knoxville and Jackass really going for real on
Oh, yeah.
somebody.
When you get hit by them, I'm never, the first time I went in there and he says, get some safety equipment. So I'm getting all this hockey gear. So I'm thinking, okay, you know, I'm going to protect myself. I'm not going to be losing the IQ, like he said. Big helmet. I walked in there and he looked at me. He says, I thought you were a tough Kenpo guy. Oh, man, right to the heart. And I'm sitting there and thinking, oh, God. So what that ended up being is a fencing helmet, volleyball pads on the elbows and the knees, and just some padded gloves. And good luck, dude, because you're going to bleed. I mean, you go home, I take my shirt off, I look like a zebra, but it was real. I mean, the realest you're going to get in that type of environment. And there's no nonsense with them. And I guarantee you, some of the fast, flashy twirls, you do not see that when you're fighting in that dog weather world. It is real. It was definitive, and it had a conviction behind it. I mean, they were not letting you get off the hook.
So let's gonna wrap it up here. Okay. So our final thoughts on this is we're just starting, no pun intended, to scratch the surface. I don't want to beat it into you guys. Otherwise, you might just shoot back at me with some answers I might not know what to say.
you know, I do want to say something. There is a true value. There is a true value to getting in there, and that is to fully understand the danger that you're facing when you face a weapon. I mean, that's
laughing about this, but this is not funny business. So what's your final thoughts on this, Todd?
Don't lie to yourself when you're training. I mean, you know, be as realistic without hurting each other as possible, but be as realistic in your mind with regards to what can actually happen and what would actually come at you. Like Mr. Zaninovich has said several times, you know, the thrusting lance technique, it's not going to be a one and done. It's going to be out, back, out, back, out, back, out, back. You know, you're going to feel like an Australian lost in the desert. It's just not going to work out well for you. Stay out the center line, all of those things, you know.
Marty, what are your final thoughts on this?
You know, my thoughts are a lot like Mr. Durgan just stated too. You know, you got to be true to yourself and really get the truth coming out on what you're teaching, because you do not want to misrepresent what you don't know. And I think it behooves us as instructors to let the student know, hey, here's the level I have and the proficiency I have in the weaponry system. And I think there's so many teachers that don't do that. And I like the candidness that we have tonight, because that's what's going to keep that student safe when he leaves that studio, or he moves out of the city, he goes to another instructor. At least we planted the seed to be aware, you know. And if we do that, we're going to give them that awareness, that understanding. And he's got to realize too that, you know, we're not teaching him how to take a life, although you could do that, but they have to have the understanding that we're here to preserve life. And preserving means making you aware and raising your success ratio if it, God forbid, you ever get in a situation, you know, confronted with a weapon.
You know, I really look forward to your new book going to come out in the near future.
Thank you.
I really think it's going to be great. I would love actually to see a seminar with you two gentlemen in it and covering this. I think that is something down the line. I hope that
we're available, aren't we, Mr. Durgan? We're available.
Yes,
set it up.
I'd love to see him in this. I'd love to be at one of his seminars.
I think it would be really cool to have that, and we'll further discuss this. But regardless, for the listener out there, listen, this is real, man. This is about as real as you're going to get. It's not Hollywood. It's not playtime. You're going to actually have to deal with this. And if you don't get the right kind of training, and then understanding with the mindset, what's going to happen with the risk factors, you're gonna something bad's gonna happen. And we need to avoid that. We never want to see anybody get hurt. And, you know, I mean, this is a very, very interesting subject. I like to go to this all occasionally. And I brought this up because we had discussed earlier with the seniors about self-defense sparring versus sport, tournament sparring. And now we're talking about self-defense training with knives and sticks, and then sport training with knives and sticks. Boy, I think that's an area that I would rather see you spend the time with qualified instructors like the two gentlemen I am talking to. So with no further ado, gentlemen, thank you so very much for coming on. It was a great night. I really appreciate you coming on, Marty. Love the logo. Todd, thank you so much. And my name is Paul Casey on behalf of the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame and my friends Todd Durgan and Marty Zaninovich. We thank you for listening to us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Salute.
Thank you.